This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. What's it like to not have a voice? More specifically, what is it like to have a voice, a powerful, intelligent, passionate voice, but one that no one can hear? This is the case for literally millions of people in the world today who have stories to tell, and stories that need or should be heard, but who are not able to access mainstream media channels that we all still turn to for our news on a regular basis. These stories are about fleeing violence, about what it's like to be disabled, or about trying to see where the road from poverty to prosperity begins. Now, I know that social media has evolved this equation, to be sure. I mean, this podcast is advertised on social media, and we try to use social media to get the word out about it. However, I also know firsthand that even when you have access to all the right tools and resources and great stories, it's still a massive effort to break out of the overwhelming ocean of Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and thousands of other individual voice outlets to be heard at any type of scale. Libby Powell, my guest for the 116th episode of the Terms of Reference podcast, is implementing a vision for giving voice to the unheard in mainstream media. She's the founding director of an organization called On Our Radar, a nonprofit communications agency that seeks out, supports, and helps to amplify unheard voices. Libby started out like many of us. For several years, she worked in humanitarian aid supporting health and advocacy programs in Palestine and the refugee camps of Lebanon. But then she retrained herself as a multimedia journalist to cover development and rights issues for the UK press. And, as you'd expect, she's no slacker. In 2010, she won the Guardian International Development Journalism Award, and in 2014, she was listed as one of journalism.co.uk's top female innovators in digital media. I spoke with Libby in London. Hello, Libby. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
No problem. Nice to be joining you.
Libby, where are you sitting today?
Well, I'm in a super hot office in the middle of central London, in Farringdon. So hanging in there on a rare heat wave in London.
So we're recording this in late July 2016, so I guess it's a part of that massive heat wave that the globe is undergoing right now.
Yeah, well, we always complain we don't get a British summer, and then we get one in such full force that everyone melts, and then we say, rain, come back, all's forgiven. We're on day 3 of the heat wave.
You run an organization called On Our Radar, which is a journalistic pursuit. So why don't we just start with you telling us about what it is that you do? What's the service that you deliver, and how does it work?
Okay. So we are a small team with journalists, software engineers, project designers, and we're kind of all here in the same room, in the same organization, because we feel that communities who are vulnerable are kind of expert communities. They're people who totally understand their own lived experiences, and we want to run a communications agency for them. So we run a communications agency that sits between really influential people and platforms like the media and those who are really isolated and excluded from public dialogue. And it's a rights-based project. It's something we're driven to do because we feel that this is one way that we can help vulnerable groups to be known, to get support, to be valued. But it's also a really playful kind of pioneering project because we use new technology, we invest in brand new voices, and we co-create this kind of very powerful community-led media that helps to highlight really complex issues, usually to very influential people who are key givers or key change makers. So yeah, we are journalistic in nature, but we kind of blur the lines between technology and journalism, development. We try and kind of work across different sectors to make sure voices are heard.
Give me a real tangible example, like maybe pick your favorite project and walk me through how you play that middleman role and how that's different, how that's changing perceptions, or how that's changing the way that information gets reported out into the media.
Yeah, so probably a real favourite but slightly unusual one is actually one we're doing here in the UK. Could and probably will one day be completely globally relevant. But it's a project we're working on called Dementia Diaries. Now, so one of the communities that's really unheard here in the UK are people with early stage dementia, and it's a really growing issue within our ageing population. And one of the things we are doing is creating a system. So it's an audio system. It's based on voicemail, which is so recognized even by an older generation, as using it as a reporting tool for people to be able to track their lived experiences, so their day-to-day life of living with this condition. They kind of brought together in a really supportive, what would supposedly be called a workshop, but really as a kind of supportive space where they learn a bit about the project. They also learn about why their views are so valuable to people who are trying to change the way that dementia is researched and catered for, and why the public need to know about dementia because they don't understand how to respond to somebody who seems confused or frightened. So we give them their sense that actually, yes, they do have a huge place around the table, and actually they are already expert in the issue and the condition. We give them actually a specially printed mobile phone. It's a 3D printed phone, which enables them to connect to a voicemail. And the reason we've printed the phone, and this is kind of where our technology side comes in, is that key-based or sequence-based technology becomes very difficult when you've got dementia. So we've sort of 3D printed a phone which has got one key word on it, report. And when they press that button, they get through to a standardized voicemail which says, "Hello, thank you to the radar reporting line."
I got to stop you for a second. That's awesome. That's fantastic. I had no idea you were going there, but sorry, continue your story, but that's fantastic.
So, it's a kind of simple assistive technology, and we always try and look at low tech because the groups we work with often have a challenge with connecting with technology. But going with really simple tech, either that we design or that we kind of harness, enables people to report using usually audio or SMS. So the two kind of common denominators of mobile across the world. In this instance, in Dementia Diaries, they leave often a daily, sometimes sporadic audio diary. It's hilarious. Sometimes they tell us, really funny things that have happened. Sometimes they're really distressed. They're usually very honest. Sometimes they're really mundane. And they all come into a central database that we then listen to with the help of volunteers and our team. And then what happens there is two things. One, we get back to them. We let them know we've received it and heard it, and we do kind of weekly mentoring calls to say, "Listen, that's so interesting. You talked to us about that. Other people are talking about that. Can you tell us more?" And then we also curate and edit these pieces of audio into really powerful collective thematic pieces of media, which we then share as a kind of press agency with either mainstream press, or we've shared it with key companies like BT here in the UK who are using it for training of staff. So we really act as that communications agency, getting it in, helping them to kind of get the confidence to continue to report, and then curating it into something that's really meaningful for public sharing.
Now, take me to an international dimension. I mean, I'm lucky enough to know you a little bit, and I know that you've done, for instance, a really deep project in Sierra Leone. How would this same kind of process work in an international context where, we're talking humanitarian aid or we're talking emergency assistance kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same kind of model. Sierra Leone's a lovely project because we started there. I went out there as a young journalist with a tiny bit of seed funding to be able to explore whether this kind of new collaborative journalism would work as a model. And 4 years later, they're still our most active reporting group. And one of the things that happened there during our journey with them, I trained them back in 2012 for the elections. But then a couple of years later, of course, the Ebola outbreak happened. And it was a time when no one could get into Sierra Leone who wasn't already there. They've got a very low, poorly resourced media landscape anyway. So our reporters who've been reporting on community issues for a couple of years were really well equipped to be able to start sharing the stories from the borders and the villages where Ebola was taking the greatest toll. In a similar way, we didn't design new technology, but they all had a public number, a local number, which they'd been using to send and file stories via our SMS. So simple short form stories, which would then come through to our editorial dashboard. We could respond in real time, so we can in situ be covering kind of the creative thought patterns or the unfolding stories with them. And then we were kind of pulling out these short form texts and either word by word creating long form articles or creating kind of collected mapped stories or so on for publication. And in the Ebola outbreak, when this kind of happened, it was a really, really sort of intense but very powerful way of getting these community stories heard. We were able to cut and share media immediately for the BBC World Service, which was in fact played back to them that evening, which was great, using a combination of SMS and recorded phone calls. We were able to do some really high broadcast pieces with Channel 4 and The Guardian here, pieces that people really think, wow, you need to have kind of this very high level of sophistication, of analytical kind of sophistication to be able to kind of talk about the Ebola issue. But actually these communities were just sharing this really powerful, insightful community issues that were unfolding where they were. So yeah, that's an instance, and we've applied it to many other things. We've done stuff looking at corruption in Nigeria, and we've done work looking at homelessness through the same similar kind of net lens. We're about to start a big project working on malaria and eradication of malaria and how that's going to be seen from the community angle. So whatever the kind of issue, as long as there's a community who are holding that insight but who are rarely heard, then that axis is really where we kind of step in, and a combination of technology and journalism.
So take me to the genesis of On Our Radar. Did you wake up one day and know that this is what you had to do? Was this was it a slow burn where you kind of were having a conversation with a bunch of different co-founders and you finally found a way to get it? Has the project continued to evolve, or does it seem like basically smell and taste the way that you originally thought about it? How'd that happen?
Oh, I wish it had been so simple and planned. I would have loved to have sat down with a group of
What? You didn't think of this immediately? You're like, hey, here's how it works.
So I don't know whether it's a common story, but it seems really obvious that a lot of organisations started very organically, and On Our Radar is sort of the same. I worked for several years supporting development projects in the Middle East, and there kind of witnessed the crisis, active warfare there, and the effect that it had on communities, but also the long drawn out kind of humanitarian crises that come with occupation and violence. And I very much was involved in kind of capturing stories there for no other purpose than internally to understand how we would design projects. I then retrained as a journalist because I realised how much I was in sort of taking pleasure in listening to people and kind of collecting stories, and tried my hand at freelance journalism. I wrote on development and rights for some really wonderful media houses. I was lucky to kind of get that level of exposure. But Stephen, I absolutely hated it. I found it so soul-destroying to be a white middle-class girl sitting writing on behalf of these communities about FGM and active conflict, and I just found it sort of very false. And although all the social kind of goodness and the purpose was there, it just wasn't my story to tell at all. And it always felt like it was glossy, and that the editorial kind of agendas were squashing these stories. And then I hardly ever had time to get back to the people that I'd interviewed and tell them, oh, it was great, this many people read it, and this is the reaction that I've seen happening online. I also hated working on my own, just sitting in an office kind of just on my own trying to find these stories. It just seemed so arbitrary. So it was on the way back from a story in northern Sri Lanka where I just felt really disheartened. The story that I'd been out there for like 2 weeks researching and working with communities was cut to like 300 words. And I just felt like, wow, I'd done a massive disservice to the communities by giving them that promise of visibility and voice, but then not being able to deliver it. And that's where I had the idea that actually maybe I could set up a different type of media house, a different type of communications agency that would put the sources or the kind of the communities first and use it as an opportunity to build their confidence and their skills, and at the same time produce like absolutely like mind-blowing content that had like the emotion and trust and facts that you just don't get from parachute journalism. So really, I started it as a project. I tried it out. As I said, in Sierra Leone was the first place I went with a bunch of like photocopy notes and literally nothing else. And then
Did you just jump off the cliff and you said, I'm going to self-fund this and I'm going to just go do this? Or how did you get that first project?
I actually went to a former contact in a disability charity that I'd done some work with. And I said, across the world, one of the most unheard groups is always, no matter where you are, people with disabilities. And I felt that because I'd actually been to Sierra Leone before and I'd done a story on disability, if I could go back and find the young people that I interviewed and say, hey, remember me? I'm the white person who turned up and asked you loads of stories and then left. If I could go and find them and say, hey, it's me, I'm back. And actually, there's a chance for you guys to kind of learn the basics of journalism together, you up for that skills share, then that would be a really interesting way of kind of a really interesting genesis, right? From what I was doing to what I was going to do. And this chairman of this charity said, right, okay, I'll give you a little bit of money just to try that. And that's what he did. And incrementally we got, I brought somebody else on, another journalist called Alice Klein, who was a wonderful sort of storyteller. And she, was my co-director, and we went to Kenya with the same model on the basis of a community need there. And we literally just shoestringed it through the first couple of years. And each project we did, a few more people came and we got a slightly bigger kind of visibility of the story. And naturally it started to be that people actually started seeing this as a valuable service. So less the media houses, this is really kind of critical to the genesis of Radar, is that we thought we would work predominantly with media houses, but media industry is just absolutely going through its own crisis and has very little money to plow into innovation, really. or indeed content.
Tell me about that. Is that, sorry, I don't want to distract the thread where you're going, but we're talking about global giants here. I mean, we're talking about the CNNs, the BBCs, the Fox Newses of the world. What's the crisis you're talking about? Is it the fact that citizen journalism basically is usurping their power?
So there's a lot of things happening, and we could talk a whole podcast on this.
Well, let's do the 1 minute recap.
Citizen journalism is a strange beast for qualified journalists. It is a bit usurping, but it's also, it's like you've got a really brilliant tradesman and somebody's coming in off the street and being like, I can do this. And it's so that sort of disconnect between them not seeing as collaborators, but seeing as sort of almost a clash. So there's that happening. But there's also so much of the innovation money that's around for media is going into how you distribute media. So how mobile is used for consuming media and how we deliver the story. So little is going into how we source the news. And it's such a grey area, and it's all to do with responsibilities for those people, and it's to do with how do you get there, and you don't want to start becoming a capacity building charity or you're a media house. So everywhere we've gone, there's appetite for the work that we do, and we have worked very well with media agencies. But the buy-in to get that budget freed up to go and do some brave new work with a community who may or may not bite, who may or may not be able to produce content, it's a bit of a shot in the dark. When they do invest, it almost always yields something powerful, but kind of getting all those keys unlocked and those locks kind of freed up has been really hard. So we've ended up doing a lot more work for the third sector, for social organisations and humanitarian organisations who have a big desire to produce meaningful public content, and do have budgets for communication and they do have budgets for capacity building, and they absolutely love it when those two things come together. So we've ended up doing so much more work with that sector and kind of reaching the media via advocacy agencies than we have directly with media houses.
Has that been a happy discovery or a reluctant discovery? Are you okay? Do you find that that's advantageous to your position, being connected with that group rather than the media houses, or?
I was surprised when I definitely started it thinking it was going to be different. But actually, it's a real pleasure to work with other people who've got the same social values as you, or other organisations that have the same values as you, and to be collaborating with them. You're kind of in a chain of like-minded people passing this really difficult information up the chain to where it's going to be heard publicly. So it is actually a real joy. We also, coming from a development background, I understand the pressures they're under from donors and from also, the difficulties of tying together two very distinct departments, one around public comms and fundraising and marketing, and the other one around project and capacity building and the focus on the community. And I think we're in a really kind of unique situation that we know both those pillars quite well, and we talk to them, both of them. So it has been really, really, we've got some wonderful relationships at the moment that we're working with. And when we do hit a great, meaningful partnership with a media company or media house, we see it as a massive bonus, actually, because we know how much more difficult that is to do,
Well, that was kind of where my mind was going as well. So I'm thinking, here you are, you kind of rock up to, the BBC or CNN or whoever, and you say, hey, look, I've got this great story from Sierra Leone, or I've got these great stories to tell. And I could see an editor or someone who's sitting at the editorial desk say, yeah, right. Tell me about that challenge. How hard is it to now sell yourself into these organizations, or have you really you leveraged your experience? How does that work?
So just to go back one step, when I say partner with organizations, we've never really had a problem placing media in media houses. It's just working with them on the mechanism for getting those stories is so difficult. So they'll happily buy and take the stories that are created from the communities. That's never been a problem. We've had stuff in all the major UK press, and we've done lots of stuff with the Ebola stuff with the European press as well. But getting them to kind of say, yes, we'll stump up the direct costs that are needed to train the communities and to help with the technology that is going to facilitate that storytelling, that's the difficult bit. In terms of placing the media, we have an editor who's well known, or is increasingly well known amongst the editorial circles. We have experience pitching as freelancers, so we use all of that. We also, we kind of work out we do that kind of very subtle change between helping the communities to, obviously giving them the freedom to report what they like within the context of the project, but also helping to nudge them to say, look, this is happening, this day's coming up, this summit's coming up, there's a chance that there's going to be a lot of media around this angle. And then they can choose and say, okay, great, that's really good knowledge. I didn't know that about the UK media press, and, change their story so it's a bit more angled towards International Youth Day or the fact that Brexit's just happened. So that's where the collaboration really works. And in terms of the sort of squeamishness of the media, there is some, and there's a lot of more relationship building that we need to do than, say, a well-qualified stringer or freelancer who's coming in, needs to do. But there is generally an excitement about using the material once we can show them that it's been checked and verified by us, which we put our name to it. And quite often the stories that we do sell to the press are first person anyway. So it's not the kind of analytical, factual storytelling that they might need their lawyers onto. It's more like, I'm here and this is happening and this is what I'm seeing, which is gold dust for them because the costs of sending someone over to try and find somebody to tell them that story, to make that connection, is quite kind of vast. So yeah, it's a benefit to them and benefit to us and to the community. So it's a nice. With the Ebola project, we've just absolutely hammered it on the press and really, really tried to do that because we wanted to make sure that the giving public in Europe well aware that the kind of the rumblings of Ebola, particularly kind of after the zero case, were still being felt very, very kind of keenly. So, and there's been great, we've had great feedback from readers and people who've kind of watched the web documentary and so on. So
that's fantastic. So within the development community, my mind kind of says, here we are in 2016, we're looking at 2017 already. Are you really a first mover here? Is this being done by other people, or do you have any competition out there?
I always hate saying we're at the beginning of something because I think that everything's come from everything else. I think, there's been so many pioneers. One thing that all aligned was I started Radar during the Arab Spring.
Which is when the social media was just absolutely critical, right?
Right. So the term had been there, but it wasn't so publicly known. And we'd never seen such a demonstration of the value of in situ mobile mobile citizens who could share information as it was happening. And we were learning a lot of lessons from that and from Syria that came next. And we learned a lot in that stretch, that 5-year stretch. And we had very quickly invested in some technology that would enable us to translate incoming low-level mobile content into digital content. So we had a technical offer straight away, and we had this kind of cross-disciplinary approach of being part development, part journalistic. So I think there was an unusual combination of things that we had, and I think they are still quite unusual, and it was timely, and let me put that there. I don't know if we were the first, and there were certainly people that I look up to, big giants like Ushahidi, who were doing it on a big scale, crowdsourcing on a big scale. And actually, that taught me want to do it on a big scale. The groups we train are small. We invest an enormous amount of them, usually over years. They tell the story of, a 360 story of where they are and who they're with. And it's in-depth lived experiences rather than short, sprints of data. So I've learned from them and changed as a result of it. And I think we do cover a niche in the kind of in the journalistic space, which is we still hold.
Yeah, and it's clearly nascent, and there's obviously a demand for it. So you spoke of Ushahidi. Tell me about scale for Radar. I mean, what's the next 5 years look like? Are you able to take this model global? Does your model and your technology allow you to basically go into any country you want, or how does that work in your brain?
Yeah, we had a couple of options. I was really allergic to the word scale for a long time because I felt that we got our best work done when we were a small team working with small groups of reporters, and the stories were just as powerful as they were if we went big. And I was very against an order about scale, and then of course realised that was completely unhelpful. So, but then I think we had two options for scale. One was that we became an implementing team, right? So we built our technology from the beginning to be scalable in the sense that it can hold a huge amount of traffic. It can be accessed from anywhere. It's increasingly insecure in the sense of kind of addressing changes in security and data security and so on. So the tech was built to scale. Obviously, training curriculums are shareable and deliverable across different platforms. And then the big question was, the big thing that was hindering that was the relationships that you need to build. So our work is very, very sort of strongly based on troubleshooting, yes, connectivity, but more importantly, the kind of capacity and confidence issues that unheard communities have when they've been told they don't have a voice, or they're not interesting, or they're not, they shouldn't be speaking. We try, trying to overturn like generations of prejudice and tell them, yes, you are. You are valuable. You do have a voice. You are experts. So that was always the thing that I felt was sort of stopping our scalability, as it were. But actually, I think the second option for us was that we stopped trying to be an implementing partner, and we develop tools for other people to go and deliver the work we're doing. And deliver a framework where people can use our technology and they can use our curriculum and they can train up according to the kind of guidelines that we suggest. And that they're mentored by someone who understands their context but also has one foot into the kind of influencing space. And you're literally catching us at the kind of summer of pivot, where we are becoming a slightly leaner team, where we do still deliver full cycle projects, and that's where we learn, and that's where we do a lot of our innovation. But what we try and do is, out of each project and each kind of experiment and each partnership, is consolidate that tool. Some of it we throw away. The vast majority of it was consolidated and documented. So we're starting to get to the stage. Beautifully, it started from the bottom up, which is a really nice move, is that one of the very first reporters or trainees that ever walked into the very first radar workshop is currently running a chapter in Freetown for young people with disabilities and connecting them, their stories to the police, so that they understand the kind of abuse and vulnerabilities that the disabled population have. And he's running the technology, and he's doing the training, and he's doing the mentoring with his own little team. And if he can do it in one of the worst connectivity spaces with like the lowest resources, then I have really high hopes that a head office or a kind of great dynamic sort of team of communicators could run the same. So that's where I think the scale will come for the model. And it all comes down to like what we're trying to be innovative in is not technology. We'll never catch up. We'll never be the best. We're like group of young people working our asses off.
I don't know. You're printing phones, for crying out loud. I mean, maybe 3D printing is more mainstream than I know, but you guys seem pretty cutting edge to me.
Well, that relies on us knowing wonderful kind of people who have wonderful skills. And I think, we don't want to try and be a big conglomerate of like technology development and, kind of training. But what we would love to do is be part of this paradigm shift that changes vulnerable communities from being beneficiaries or users or poor people to being collaborators, designers, experts. I really think that's what this is all about, is if we can try and be part of that paradigm shift where powerful people see vulnerable people as influential, then that's great. And I think we'll get there quickest and most effectively by code sharing our model, speaking on podcasts, wherever it is where we share knowledge. And that comes down to a kind of fundamental value of ours around honesty. We've made some mega failures and mega mistakes.
Well, this is where I want to go next, and it's impossible to unpack in the time we have together completely, but I'm just thinking of the logistics of, if you kind of take it from a viewpoint of one of our listeners, it's like, wow, this is a woman who had the gumption to go to Sierra Leone on her own. And obviously, you had some skills and you had some contacts and you started building these community reporters and now blah, blah. It just seems like what a row to hoe, like holy smokes. Maybe give me your top 3 challenges, or maybe you could describe it even through like, what's your biggest failure? Where have you fallen the most on your face and what did you learn from it?
Wow. I mean, my personality is a series of micro mistakes,
Well, that's everyone. We're all human, right? Okay.
Every minute. And I don't say that to kind of be self-deprecating, but I really am one of those people. As I said, I hardly ever think before I speak. I rush in. I'm a massive risk taker. And it's lovely to be that way. And it's really hard as well. And it's hard for my team to have a leader who has that appetite. So, rest assured that we've made many more than 3 mistakes. But I think one massive one is learning about, particularly as the leader of an organization, holding that space, was that you have to be able to hold it all. I am a good writer. I'm a really great writer. I could have been just a journalist. I loved writing, but that's not going to make an organization that's trying to get that paradigm shift happen. So one thing I'm a really bad thing is a mathematician. I am awful at maths. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was to outsource as soon as I possibly could all the finances. So I looked at it and I thought, holy cow, I literally have no idea where to start with this. And we were starting to get more contracts, and I was hiring people, and I had staff on payroll, and felt totally swamped. I had my baby in the middle of all of this, and I was thinking, I can't cope. And the biggest mistake I made was outsourcing something I didn't understand. I just didn't get it. And so I outsourced it. And it's literally the same feeling as when you pay £1,000 to fix your bike or car or whatever it is, because someone's telling you have to do that and you have nothing to give them back. You say, okay, you're the expert. And effectively I did that with a big component of radar. I said, right, go and manage this because I can't. And it really nearly crumbled as a result of that. So this year has been a big facing fears, is like, well, if I'm going to run a small development agency, if I'm going to do this properly, I need to know the figures really as well as I know the reporters, as well as I know my team. And it's like taken a lot of facing up to my fears and hard work in the evenings to try and kind of cross that. But now I'm really happy to say that I know the figures better than anybody else. And now I can outsource it because I know the questions I need to ask. So that's been a big, I mean, obviously that's quite organizational, but that's been a big learning. The other one is how to manage expectations of everybody. So a big, as a storyteller, I tell a great story about what we do, and that's great unless you can't deliver it. And, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes I get so excited about the possibilities and I think, yeah, we could do this and we could do this. But of course, they're all possibilities. And unless you've got a partner who's willing to share that risk with you, then sort of telling them it's possible and then going away to a really overstretched team and saying, right, make this happen, is a really backwards way of innovating, So what we've ended up doing is choosing partners who we can be honest with and say, okay, we can do this and you're getting it, really kind of tried and tested, but we have absolutely no idea about this, but we'd love to have a go at it. Are you up for it? You may lose out, but more often than not, people are up for it. And then the other big, of course, the expectations of the reporters. If we go into there and say, we are a training company, we are expert journalists, we have all the technology to hand, we will help you speak and be heard and change your lives, we'd be completely shooting from the hip. And there would be no basis for that. Instead, we go in as skill sharers. We try and frame everything as a collaboration. We stick by that, we live by that, and I think we do a really good job at it. And we also, help them to navigate the expectations that we can't manage, like when a media house promises to publish something and doesn't. We burn with them. We say to them, look, it's really shit. We've had that as well. We, share the experience back with them as young journalists. So a lot of it is kind of, that honesty.
I heard you say something that is, I hate to admit, a constant refrain in the development and humanitarian world, where your entire team is stretched too thin, and you're kind of wondering where my question is going to go is, how do you fund this organization? I know you've said a couple of times, you've got contracts to do certain things. You pick up, particular projects with different organizations. Is that your model for the foreseeable future, where it's sort of project by project, or is there a bigger pool of funding that you're looking to lock down, or how does that particular aspect of it work?
So again, it started as one idea and changed halfway through, and that's kind of models on the same shift array from media to kind of the development agencies. But as Radar emerged out of a little project to something else, I thought we would be a charity. So I thought it was really obvious that we had a charitable aim, that the communities was our focus, and the output was this media. And we actually applied to the Charity Commission twice. And the last time with loads, it took us a year to write the application, checking it with legal teams. We got rejected both times. And it really, really kind of threw me, because I couldn't really understand what, they give very little feedback as well. You get like a half page saying no, kind of basically.
Thank you, but no.
Yeah, thank you, but no. You're doing great stuff, but no. And their kind of general thing was, well, the reporters could share anything. It's not necessarily about kind of charitable stuff. And then the other one was, but the media benefits from this content as well, which I was just shocked to the core with. I felt it was a very short-sighted response. Mm-hmm. But I understand now that there's a real risk aversion, and the Charity Commission are overstretched themselves and so on. But what that meant was I didn't want to go in for another third year of trying. I didn't think it was going to be fruitful anyway. So whereas we had previously expected to go for grants and to maybe kind of drum up some community fundraising through challenges or student communities, whatever. And we then thought, wow, we're going to go under if we just accept, or we're not charity, we're not anything. So we started to look at, well, if we could act as a subcontractor to grant holders or to kind of big organizations who did have some flexibility of funds and some kind of resources, we would then deliver something really important for them in their chain of activities, and they would pay us for that work, and we could make a small surplus, which we then can plow into either kind of lab work where we innovate ourselves on our own terms, or our own autonomous media projects, which are critical because you can't always be, well, we know as journalists, one of the things we didn't want to do is just be jumping through hoops of, we'll pay for this, okay, we'll cover this, we'll pay for that, we'll cover that. We wanted to be able to say to communities, right, we've got a little bank of free funds where if you think something's important enough, we're there with you, we're going to go on that journey with you. So that's really where we are, is we've got, kind of a healthy kind of pipeline of contracts. They're from unusual and obvious clients. I mean, we work with Christian Aid at the moment. We work with Comic Relief. We've done stuff with, commercial organisations as well who've wanted to try and increase sort of awareness of staff, increase content around diversity and so on. So the lovely thing is we can fit into anybody who wants to use information to change something, whether it's to change minds or to change a service or to change a power dynamic. So really, I think, and in a way, there's more flexibility than there is with grants. So, we're exploring that at the moment, and it seems like there's a healthy market for it. And it seems that we can just about kind of achieve what we wanted to achieve, which is a surplus to allow us that freedom, or to indeed allow the communities the freedom to be able to innovate and report. And actually, for the first time, I think we've got a really clear plan of how to grow and how to keep our overheads appropriately tight, and what we do now is we'll have a leaner team and bring in specialists, either community specialists or production specialists when we need them on project sprints. And that means that we've got our pick of the global experts. We can build that community of sort of producers and providers and kind of social community experts, and really bring them in when the context is right, rather than having a big bloated team of people who are all trying to jump to different tunes,
The entire conversation that we've had so far over the last half an hour here, 45 minutes, is you've done a fantastic job. Somebody sort of threads the needle. It's a fantastic dialogue on how innovation happens, right? I mean, from the genesis of an idea to now, you've got a fully functional, successful organization. And even though you're several years old now, there's no certainty in it, right? How do you pick and choose where you want to go in the future? Is it happenstance? Do you have like this really clear vision? The question I wanted to ask was, to me, your vision is bringing voice to unheard communities. And so I'm wondering, at what point does a community go from being unheard to a heard community, and you say, hey, you know what? You've got the tools, you've got the resources, we're moving on to the next one. I mean, maybe that's completely years and years, decades down the line for some of these communities. But I'm wondering how you pick and choose what it is that you're going to focus on next, or is it wherever the next crisis is? Is there any systematic process you have for that?
I suppose it's kind of, if I'm really honest, there's sort of four forces at play. The most kind of, the one that seems and feels the most apparent on the day-to-day basis is, where are the resources that we need to do this? So, who can we partner with? Where's that kind of beautiful marriage between, yes, we've got some budget and we've got a platform, and yes, you're the right people for us. And so that's our kind of day-to-day, often just, makes us think about, obviously there's a screening process once that magic does happen. But so that's the first. The second is that now, even though I'm founded at Radar, I have now got an amazing strategic team who work with me, and we're kind of all equal kind of contributors to the strategic plan. There's four of us on it, and we kind of herald from the four pillars of Radar: the technology, the project design, the media, and the kind of the founding governance. And we meet regularly, and we're putting an enormous amount of work into where we think we can add most value. So that's always a question to us: is where is it possible for us to do the work? Sometimes because of political censorship or because of the kind of environment, there just isn't a possibility for us to go where we'd like to go. I mean, we'd love to, for example, work in South Sudan, but the risks would just be so vast, and as a kind of outsiders, we probably wouldn't add the value that we would hope to add. So that's a force at play. Then, of course, there's the kind of the beauty of when a community requests our help. And whilst that's rare because the unheard communities don't tend to be online or connected, we do have very clear instances where a community has asked us to come because they've heard from a neighbouring community, or they've been kind of exposed to the work. So, of course, we're always trying to be reactive to that. And then finally, a really honest one is that I still feel like I've got the ability to kind of hope that we could work certain places and make that happen. So, it's not necessarily a place, but at the moment I always thought we would do more with women than we're doing at the moment. Just so happened that, a lot of the work we've done has been very mixed gender, and that's great, but I'd love to cover more gender issues. And I still feel like I've got the ability to kind of make that happen at Radar because, okay, it's a complete personal dream and desire, but there's no reason why it wouldn't work with our strategic value or be of use. So there's still a little bit of that each of the teams sort of comes in and says, oh, do you know what? I read this and I heard this and I just sat in bed last night and really thought about what it would be like. And with a small team, you can still make that happen, I think. So they're the kind of forces at play. The community needs and desires to have us, the resources and the funding there, the kind of possibilities where we can work and the barriers around that, and then the kind of the team energy and where they would really be excited about working. I think they're all at play.
About two questions I have. I try to ask this of every guest here on the podcast is first, who do you pay attention to in, whatever free time you have? Do you read blogs? Do you look at magazines? Do you listen to the radio? Who do you pay attention to get ideas, learn trends, find out where the future's heading?
Stephen, I have a 2-year-old, 4 months pregnant. I kind of want to start up.
I'm a father too. I've got 3 of them. I get it.
Because I don't read it anywhere near as much as I do. I have a 25-minute sprint on the Thames link between Catford and Farringdon in the morning where I try and catch up. But what's interested me is, of course, there are some amazing. I look very closely at the people who inspire me when I started Radar. So some of them are in the media world. I think it's fascinating the stuff that people are experimenting with VR and media. And we were just talking about one of our team went to go and try out the new VR experience on solitary confinement that The Guardian's done, and it just blew his mind. Just listen, I haven't put on the Oculus Rift headset and listened to that story or participated, but he brought it to life so clearly that I just knew it had profoundly changed the way that he will now produce media. And I really love working where I am. I'm just fascinated in the way that technology is being applied to kind of the unsexy topics like dementia and homelessness, because I get to see a lot of that. But what I don't get to do much of is sit down with other wonderful kind of organisations or even really get to engage much in dialogue on Twitter or so on. But we have a Slack channel that we post daily, all of the things that kind of inspire us, and it's bubbling away constantly with kind of snippets and bits. And it's so wide-ranging with Radar. We might get a mobile provider who's just changed the way that they provide a gateway, or we might have somebody who's produced a brand new kind of media piece. And I love that about being here. The kind of the range of interests. And I suppose for us, it's tracking innovation in terms of who's doing the best thinking. So sometimes we post a lot of blogs on mistakes and failures and pivots. And I think people are very brave about sharing that kind of work. I think that's really good when they do, and I'm sure they don't get the feedback that they should.
When you say that you're like about being here, is that Central London? Are you in a particular hub? You haven't mentioned that. Are you in a particular tech hub, or you just have a shared office space? Or does here just mean here in the space that you happen to work, like the intellectual space you're working in?
So remember when I said I outsourced all our finances and we nearly crashed?
Yes.
So at that point, we had to make some cuts, and one of the things we cut was our office. And for a while, we were absolutely kind of devastated because we'd lost our space, which was in a really fun, creative hub in Hackney. And it was painful, and it was a painful cut for me to have to make. But it was that or a team member, And actually, whilst I was thinking about how we could embed ourselves in somewhere that would be affordable and creative, I actually ended up going back to a former funder and saying, we were having this problem, and just, again, being honest and saying, look, I'm really cocked up and now we've had to give up our office. And the funder who had supported us, which was formerly called the Forward Foundation, we've got a bank of 5 desks that you can use in the middle of central London. Just, be good participatory tenants of the space. And we've just been here now since January in this like lovely space sandwiched between another social enterprise and a tech development firm, Neon. It's just been like such a manna from heaven, and I'm so glad that I was honest about that, because it ended up being something it was a huge in-kind gift. So as we're kind of getting back on our feet, we'll probably move at some point. Don't want to rely on the goodwill too long to a media space, but it just goes to show what people can do for a small company that's hidden. When you think about the amount that gets spent on desks.
Overhead's the killer, isn't it?
a killer. And one of the things I've just had such luck with, or just, is in-kind support from people. People have delivered business coaching sessions, and they've helped do web development, and they've helped with the office, and they've helped with, kind of staff training. And it's wonderful the amount of kind of sharing that you get from both peers and elders and people who've done this before. Gosh, if I tried to calculate how much that I would have spent or what I would have prioritized if I hadn't had that.
Last question. Tell me about something outside of the radar universe, particularly in sort of the humanitarian or development space, that you're psyched about. You mentioned Ushahidi earlier. I mean, you're printing phones, so maybe you've already mentioned them, but is there anything out there that you're super excited about that's not directly related to your business line?
So here's one. So it's actually something I've kind of literally been watching emerge. But one of the things I'm always amazed at is I think MSF have a really great attitude to technology. And I know some of their team, and I know that they're really human-centric developers. And I don't know if you remember the kind of, if you've seen the Missing Maps project that they've done, which is basically crowdsourcing the mapping of unmapped spaces, which is kind of almost hand in hand in parallel to what we're doing with voice. They would realise that trying to kind of cater for millions of people who are living in very vulnerable communities that are not mapped was a complete logistical ball ache. So, in terms of kind of really scuppering humanitarian efforts, it was major. But then also there's something very symbolic about not being on a map. So basically they've kind of developed this series of apps, and they have these mapping parties where people can literally physically map spaces that are unmapped, and they can do that whether they're in Congo or in Hackney, and it's kind of it's using OpenStreetMap, I think it is. And now what they've also done is kind of gamified it. They've got this new Map Swipe app, which you can get on kind of Android or Apple, and it's just very empowering. It's fun to do, and there's this kind of in a critical moment where everyone's chasing Pokemons, it's something collaborative you can do, which is actually just genuinely really helpful. And I know, for example, I spent a very short summer working with the Red Cross as an international tracer, with unaccompanied minors arriving here with no family, often with no English, really traumatic situations. And then our job was to try and help them get a letter back to their family to say they'd arrived. And it was just so hard because you'd be sitting there with a hand-drawn map of like a well and a mosque and a tree and just trying to work out where their house was. So, that, and it was so difficult back then. That was kind of 6 years ago. Now this kind of apps and these kind of apps are just making it totally collaborative and really, really effective. There's another one called What 3 Words, which I've heard about recently, which is a similar thing, is where these very bright people have worked out that you can create a sort of situation space of the whole globe using 3 words rather than a postcode or geolocation or any kind of data. So, I might be sitting on goat, tree, dog. And if I walk sort of a block down the road, it might be another set of 3 words, poster, bike, shed. And commercial companies, but also humanitarian sector could help locate where things are happening or where to drop supplies using these 3 words. And, I'm not a big data person, I'm definitely a storyteller, but I just think that those kind of beneficial, kind of community-based solutions are just really, really exciting. And I think it will make the world feel smaller and make it feel more navigable. I suppose our job in the middle of all of that is to make it feel less othered and less kind of unknown as well.
Libby, thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Stephen.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from Aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.